There you go, man. Let's get to the Detroit Lions, another fan favorite. And I got a question. The Kansas City Chiefs, I'm sorry, the Baltimore Ravens are the fan favorite. The Detroit Lions are the fan favorite right now. Is this something that has to do with the legacy franchises, the franchises that are winning, that people don't want to see these teams win? Detroit, the fans are heavy on Detroit. I don't know if the money's over there. Detroit's secondary is questionable. San Francisco has been dominant all year. They had a 3-game drought middle of the season. They since recovered. They've been dominant. Well, they weren't that dominant against the Packers, but they won. They're at home. Detroit hasn't won a damn thing since the 1950s, even though that doesn't matter. But people are pulling for the Detroit Lions. Do the Detroit Lions have a chance against the historic favorite juggernaut, the San Francisco 49ers? Do they have a chance?
They do have a chance, but it's remote, and here's why. And I really like what you mentioned, because you are 110% correct. The whole world loves Cinderella. They love a Cinderella story. They like a feel-good, rags to riches story. And this team, since 1956, they've won one playoff game going into this season, and that was in 1991. So the fact that they have a media darling for a coach who's very good with sound bites, talking about controlled fury, it's like, does this dude have a staff of writers coming up with this BS nonsense? It's like, dude, maybe you should work on your math skills instead of coming up with controlled fury. Oh, I'm so scared. Get over yourself. Are you kidding me? This guy Campbell is a clown. He doesn't know how to coach. I've never been a fan of a grown man crying on national TV. He's always getting emotional. It's like he's an attention whore.
Damn.
Okay? Get back to X's and O's. You don't want me to hold back, do you? You want to know how I really feel?
Let me know how he's not wearing his heart on his sleeve. He's not a player's coach. He's an attention whore. Wow, man. All right, tell us how you really feel. Tell us how you really feel.
Well, not to mention that against the Dallas Cowboys, I understand you're an inferior team. You're the dog. And there's a rule of thought that if you are on the road, you go for the win. If you're at home, you go for the tie. So if you want to go for 2 and shock the Dallas Cowboys, fine. But when you are penalized back to the 7 to 7.5 yard line and you still decide to go for it, that's a low percentage, high risk, low reward opportunity. Now, the problem is he's been a riverboat gambler. He has gotten away with it. Staley for the Chargers is a poor man's version of Dan Campbell, and we know what happened to Staley. He got shit canned, and for good reason. But because Dan Campbell is so liked by the players, I will give him credit where credit is due. The players play hard for Campbell, but I even have a problem with that, because professional athletes and players should be playing hard regardless who your coach is. So that should be a given. The players like him, just like the Raiders players like Pierce, even though he has less coaching experience than me. And again, I don't coach football. So I'm not a big fan of players' coaches. I like guys that are stoic. I love guys like Andy Reid, that just go, Parcells and Mike Tomlin. This guy, 17 years consecutively without a losing season. Are you kidding me? The epitome of continuity and consistency. Give me Mike Tomlin every day of the week, twice on Sunday, over the likes of a fraud like Dan Campbell, who is consistent, and he gets away with it. That's the crazy part. But you're not going to get away with it against Shanahan, because Shanahan knows that he's up to shenanigans. He knows that he's going to fake a punt. He's going to go for it on 4th and 35 from his own 10, because that's what Campbell does. Now, he's been uncannily lucky. And as a professional sports bettor, I don't believe in luck. Luck, L-U-C-K, laboring, L-U, under, C, correct, K, knowledge. Laboring under correct knowledge. The harder I work, the luckier I am. Luck is the residue of design, but this guy does things off the cuff because he's ruled by his emotions. Unlike you, me, and my fellow man, ruled by logic, he's ruled by his emotions, and I can prove it. A grown man during a press conference crying, how would you like to go to war with this guy? Are you kidding me?
You bring up an interesting point that two interesting points. Dan Campbell, lucky. Staley for the Chargers, unlucky going forward, going for two, fake punting, and he gets fired. So there is something to be said about maybe the percentages working. The Chargers coach, former Chargers coach, analytics guy, and he would go for it based on what the card said. Dan Campbell goes on it on emotions, and he's a little luckier, and then he gets more credit for being the gutsy guy. Although I will say that going for two, getting bumped back and keep going for it, I thought that was crazy. All right, I don't mind going for it the first time, but going for it two times because you're emotional about getting the two actually put yourself in a detrimental situation long term. But another point, you're saying players, coaches, Antonio Pierce, the players are behind him, and you're saying Dan Campbell, the players are behind him. But the NFL pro shouldn't be playing for the coach. They should be playing for themselves, championships, money. They shouldn't be looking for players, coaches. You don't think the coach like the former Raider coach, which was I always forget his name, and I'm forever get his name because he was
Josh McDaniels.
Yeah, I'm gonna forget his name. I don't care about that. All right. So he was definitely not a player's coach, and he definitely disrespected the players. You don't think there's something to be said for a professional if you compare Josh McDaniels, who was arrogant and didn't care about the players, versus a coach that has inexperience and is not analytical, not a whiz kid, and he cares about the players? You don't think that makes a difference in professional sports?
Well, there's something to your point, Greg, but let me just back up for a second because I'm not going to give your Raiders a free pass. Josh McDaniels was a bad head coach for the Raiders. He was a bad head coach for the Denver Broncos, but most of the Raider players couldn't hold his jockstrap. This guy and his staff, they've won countless Super Bowls, okay? So they've won more Super Bowls than all of the players collectively combined as a unit. So we have to give this guy, and it's not popular for me to say this, but Jimmy crack corn, and I don't care. I still don't like players, coaches. I like coaches that win. I like players that are playing for themselves because they're professionals. They got to be professional athletes because they are the best of the best of the best. 7 billion plus people on this planet, and your worst NFL player is an absolute stud. So these are gifted athletes, and I just love the sport. I love the camaraderie and fellowship. Professional athletes. You're talking NBA basketball, roughly 330 NBA players, and 10 to 15 get a shot to make it every year because once you're in, you're in. And you still have to have that cutting edge mentality to maintain because the young buck is always coming up trying to knock you out of your position. So professional athletes have my utmost respect. But when you're talking about players, coaches, it's not a homecoming king contest. It's not a popularity contest. It's about winning. And that's where oftentimes you have to get there before you can actually win it, meaning Shanahan for the Niners. The difference between him and Campbell, night and day when it comes to coaching. Now, in the other bracket with Harbaugh for the Ravens and Reed for the Chiefs, these two guys are two heavyweights. Dan Campbell is the weak stick between these final four coaches. But again, it's a football game. Anything can happen. But if everything plays out the way I think it will, based on talent, it's going to be the Ravens and it's going to be the Niners. I wouldn't be surprised if there is an upset. It would be Kansas City. But the value, I bet numbers and value more than I bet teams. That's why my money's on KC, but I hope Baltimore wins. I'm hoping for a down the middle solves the riddle. You talk about how popular the Lions are, and they are popular because the fans like to see Cinderella. Again, that doesn't mean anything to me. Just show me the money. I'm going to bet my game, and I'm going to see the cashier to heck with Dan Campbell and the overrated, overhyped. The Lions are not the second best team in the NFC. The Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles are both better than them, but they got knocked off based on the P word, parity, on any given Sunday.
Interesting there. Just to follow up on another point there, I often thought that players at a certain level the coach should not be responsible for their motivation. The games on the schedule, many times, even with college athletes, you're getting a scholarship, you're getting exposure, you're pretty much a professional, you're getting some sort of compensation for what's going on. I understand there's adverse situations, there's learning how to adapt on the road, but motivating from the coach's perspective doesn't seem like that should come from the coach on a consistent basis, meaning that the coach is a cheerleader, and people boil down players, coaches to pretty much being a cheerleader and giving motivational and rah-rah speeches. And I've often thought as a coach, even as a young coach, that shouldn't come from the coach at a certain level. I can understand when you're learning as a young youth athlete and maybe a high school coach. At the lower level high schools like JV and Froshoff, maybe you might have to motivate some kids who don't understand things. But at the college level, for certain, at the varsity high school level, and certainly at the professional level, the whole rah-rah cheerleader coach thing, I think, is somewhat overrated. And a lot of people get credit for being sideline antics, right? Clapping and jumping up and down and yelling and passionately screaming as if that's going to make a difference. When I always say it's not about the X's and O's, it's about the Johnny and Joes. So your Johnny and Joe's got to be out there, be willing to perform on a daily basis on back-to-back nights or as you travel on the road. They got to understand that. And I do understand your point about Dan Campbell and the rah-rah player coaches. I think that's overrated for the most part, because if you look at championship coaches, most of them are not rah-rah coaches. They're not coaches that are patting players on the back and making them feel good. You know, that's all great, but those aren't the coaches that are winning. Like, they might win, they might get far, but they're not the ones that are consistently winning. That's just my opinion on that. What do you think?
I couldn't agree more. Stoicism. I'll take a stoic coach a la Bill Belichick. We're talking about the guy getting a bum rap because he's had a couple of bad years. This guy's a living legend. 6 Super Bowl wins in 24 years. And the hapless, helpless, pathetic Atlanta Falcons had a chance to hire this guy, and they passed. Are you kidding me? Did they forget 28-3 in the Super Bowl? I haven't forgot. You won't let me forget. I had the Falcons +3 looking good. I already spent that money, by the way. I'm up 28-3 in the third quarter. I'm getting +3 points. There it is. Just when I was starting to forget about it, you won't let me forget, and for good reason. But the fact is, Shanahan was a big problem as the offensive coordinator. Overrated piece of crap QB. Matt Ryan was just as bad with his bonehead decisions, throwing a 3rd and 9 pass, 2.5 yards, and then 35 guys tackle the guy because he's a stat whore. So, yeah, I think that but all the more reason why guys like Shanahan, they've figured it out, they've learned, but I want to get back to Belichick. So the Atlanta Falcons organization, which is a joke with a capital J to begin with, you interview Parcells and then you pass. Who are you going to find better than Belichick to coach your team? Forget the past 2 years. The guy's a living legend, and he's stoic. I love Andy Reid, stoic. These are guys you can get behind and go to war with, unlike the Siriannis of the world, unlike the Dan Campbells of the world, a la the Joel Embiids of the world. I said it. Professional flopper, Joel Embiid. As much as I dislike Joel Embiid, I love Kawhi Leonard.